Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 31st May 2020. And the articles that we are going to discuss today are displayed on your screen. Now some of the articles that we have covered today were already covered in the previous DNS videos, and this is because these stories were developing for the past 2 to 3 months, and that is why we have revised from the previous DNS videos, and those videos have been included in this video itself. So let us start the discussion and also revise from the previous DNS videos some important developing stories like the PM cares and the issues in the functioning of World Health Organization. Now this article on page number 10 is related to the draft e-commerce policy which is being drafted by the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. And this policy will very soon be put out in the public domain for views and comments. Now e-commerce is an important part for us from the General Studies paper 3 point of view under the topic economic development. Now the DPIIT is yet to put this draft e-commerce policy in the public domain. However, in this background, let us try and understand why is there a need for e-commerce policy in the first place. Now before looking at the different models that operate in the e-commerce section, let us first understand what is meant by this term e-commerce. So e-commerce is simply the activity of buying or selling of products on online services or over the internet. And electronic commerce draws on technologies such as the mobile commerce, electronic fund transfer, supply chain management, internet marketing, and online transaction processing. So under this, there are two dominant models of e-commerce, and they are known as the marketplace model, and the second one is known as the inventory model. Now the main feature of this marketplace model is that the e-commerce firms provide a platform for the consumers to interact with a selected number of sellers. And here the e-commerce company is just a website which provides a platform where a consumer can meet a seller. And some of the companies which are operating under this marketplace model are Flipkart, Amazon, etc. Now as opposed to this marketplace model, the other model is that of inventory model. And under this inventory model, the consumer buys the product from the e-commerce firm itself. And this e-commerce firm is managing the inventory, that is the stock of the products. Also, it runs the logistics and involves in every aspect of the business. So this means that it does not merely provide the platform to the sellers on its e-commerce website. And a prominent example of the inventory model based e-commerce is the Alibaba of China. So now in this background, what are the present guidelines governing the investment in e-commerce? So according to the new guidelines on FDI in e-commerce, 100% FDI under the automatic route is permitted in the marketplace model of e-commerce. However, FDI is not permitted in the inventory based model of e-commerce. So the present status of the FDI in e-commerce in India is that it is allowed under the automatic route and 100% FDI is allowed in the marketplace model. That is, it is allowed in those companies which are operating on the marketplace model. However, the FDI is not allowed in the inventory model of e-commerce. Now, why does India need a policy on e-commerce is an important question. And accordingly, as we note that a draft policy is being formulated and will be soon put in the public domain for comments and views. Now, the first reason for a policy on e-commerce is the rapid growth of e-commerce in India. And presently, we note that it is worth $25 billion. And in the next decade, it is expected to grow to about $200 billion. So it will be a $200 billion in the near future, and that is why we note that there is rapid growth of e-commerce in India, and that is why there is a need for a policy on e-commerce business. Second important issue is that there is lack of policy framework to deal with different aspects of the e-commerce, and some of these include the competition, regulation, data privacy, taxation, and technical aspects such as the localization of servers and technology transfer. Further, we note that government needs to play a proactive role in the growth of local industry. For example, we note that an important role has been played by the United States of America and China in developing world's most powerful technological companies, which include the Google, Apple, Facebook, Alibaba, and Microsoft. So as US and China have focused on developing the world's most powerful technological companies, it is high time that India also focuses on the development of such important technological companies. Further, the e-commerce platform has been seen as projecting unfair competition with the brick and mortar stores. And this is because of the deep discounts which are given by the e-commerce platforms. So there is a need to create a level playing field due to deep discounting which is being done by the e-commerce platforms. And that is why there are fears that such deep discounts will make the brick and mortar stores uneconomic and will push them out of the business. Further, there are issues related to the data protection and privacy. Now, the Personal Data Protection Bill requires the companies to store a copy of users' personal data in the country itself. However, major e-commerce platforms which do not have their origin in India are placing the data of the customers in the servers which are located outside our country. And this poses a risk in terms of privacy and data protection for the consumers of India. And finally, an e-commerce policy is required for India to promote its Make in India policy. And a policy on e-commerce can consider the interests of the micro, small and medium enterprises and at the same time promote the Make in India policy of the Government of India. So in conclusion, the need for a policy on e-commerce is that there is rapid growth of e-commerce and it has been witnessed in the past decade, and it is projected that it will again grow in the coming decades. Secondly, there is presently lack of policy framework to deal with different aspects of the e-commerce. Again, it is being projected that the e-commerce platforms are leading to unfair competition to the brick and mortar stores, and then there are issues related to data protection and privacy. And also India needs to promote its Make in India campaign, and at the same time it wants to promote the business for the MSME sector, and it wants to leverage the benefits of the e-commerce for the MSME sectors. So these are few aspects of the e-commerce in India, and also we have seen at the need for India to have a policy on e-commerce. However, this is a news in transition, and let us wait for the policy to be drafted finally and put in the public domain. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, these two articles in today's newspaper on page number 12 and page number 9 are important for us from the prelims perspective. So let us look at some points which can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view under these articles. So now the important point regarding the locusts is that what are locusts, how do these locusts harm the agriculture, and how many species of locusts are native to India, and further what are the range and breeding areas of these locusts. So regarding locusts, these are collections of certain species of short-horned grasshoppers in the family of Acridiidae that have a swarming phase. Further, how do these locusts harm agriculture? So according to the Food and Agricultural Organization, the swarms eat leaves, flowers, fruits, seeds, barks and growing plants. And they also destroy plants by their sheer weight as they descend on them in massive numbers. Again, how many kind of species of locusts are native to India? So only 4 species of locusts are found in India, and these include the desert locust, the migratory locust, Bombay locust and tree locust. And the present swarm and threat to the crops is being posed due to the desert locust in India. Further, regarding the range and the breeding areas, as you note that the locusts that enter India reach India from the African Horn region, which is located in this location on the map. And these mainly breed in the Ethiopia and the Somalia in the Horn of Africa. And from there on they enter the Middle Eastern region, and from there they enter the regions of Pakistan into the western part of India. So these are few important points regarding the locust swarms that are impacting the crops in India. After this, let us look at some important points related to the G7 grouping which is in news. Now regarding this G7 grouping, you should note that it had first started its meeting in the year 1975. And they started meeting in response to the economic crisis that the world was facing at that time. So now this G7 is the group of 7. It is an organization which is made up of world's 7 largest advanced economies. And these include Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom and the United States of America. Now earlier Russia was also a part of it, and it was known as the G8 grouping. However, in 2014, Russia was suspended over the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, and hence it is presently known as the G7 grouping. Now the basic aim or objective of this group is that it regards itself as a community of values, and it stands for freedom and human rights, democracy and the rule of law, and prosperity and sustainable development as its key principles. So some important points regarding the G7 is that it includes the 7 member countries and it first started its meetings in the year 1975. And Canada later joined this G6 grouping and then it came to be known as the G7 grouping. Now presently it stands for about 40% of the global GDP and has 1/10 of the world's population. And presently Russia has been removed from G8 grouping and hence it is known as the G7 grouping. Now another important grouping which is in news has been proposed by the United Kingdom and it is known as the D10 club. So it is a club of democratic partners which include the G7 countries which are the UK, US, Italy, Germany, France, Japan and Canada, and also includes Australia, South Korea and India. And its main aim is to create alternative suppliers of the 5G equipment and other technologies to avoid the relying on China, and this has been created in response to the COVID-19 pandemic for which most of the countries are holding China responsible. So the facts regarding the G7 groupings and the D10 club are important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now this article on page number 9 reads that Trump cuts ties with WHO as COVID-19 grips Latin America. So this highlights that the United States of America is cutting its ties with the World Health Organization. Now this story has been developing over past few months because of WHO's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And some of the criticisms and issues with the WHO's functioning were covered in the DNS of 20th April 2020. So what we'll do is that we will revise from that video key aspects of the issues that are affecting the functioning of World Health Organization. So let us revise from that video some of the important aspects for us from the General Studies Paper 2 point of view under the topic International Relations and important international institutions and their mandate and structure. Now this article on page number 9 talks about the limitations of WHO which have been highlighted during the handling of COVID-19 pandemic. And in this article, Dr. Shashi Tharoor has highlighted some of the limitations in the functioning of World Health Organization, and he has argued that these limitations have been imposed on WHO by the member states themselves. And this is mainly because the WHO is dependent upon the member states for its functioning and it lacks some kind of independence. So this can be a very important part for us from the General Studies Paper 2 under the topic International Relations and under the topic Important International Institutions, Agencies, their structure and mandate, and also the way they have been functioning. Now the way World Health Organization has handled the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the loopholes in its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic have already been discussed in the Daily News Simplified of 30th March 2020. And in that discussion, the mandate, structure, etc. and the way of functioning of the WHO have also been discussed. For example, it has been highlighted that WHO is a specialized agency of the United Nations. And also what are the broad objectives of the World Health Organization. And these are the eradication, development of vaccines, controlling of important diseases and creating awareness, etc. Further, various other aspects have also been discussed regarding the World Health Organization. Now in that discussion, some of the allegations have been forwarded against the World Health Organization. And the allegation against the World Health Organization is that it did not hold China accountable for misreporting about the COVID-19 pandemic. Further, even till January, the World Health Organization insisted that there was no human-to-human transmission of this disease. And thirdly, it warned the nations against imposing any kind of travel bans on flights from China, and also it delayed the declaration of COVID-19 as a pandemic. And this response of the World Health Organization towards the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the limitations in its functioning. So in this regard, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who was the Under Secretary General of the United Nations, has highlighted that it is not the fault of WHO per se, and it is the fault of the member nations who are the part of World Health Organization, and that is mainly because the WHO depends upon these member states. So let us look at some of the issues that have been highlighted by Dr. Shashi Tharoor regarding the functioning of World Health Organization, and also he has provided certain suggestions and they can be very important for us from the mains examination point of view. Now regarding the WHO's response towards the COVID-19, it has been argued that COVID-19 is an unprecedented disease, and since the establishment of World Health Organization, the world has not witnessed such a big level of pandemic. Secondly, in the functioning of WHO, there is dominance of global powers. And it is said that any United Nations body is a hostage of its most powerful member states. And this aspect can be seen even in the functioning of UN and particularly in the functioning of the Security Council. And in the functioning of the Security Council, the 5 most powerful nations of the world are the only permanent members of the Security Council. And these member nations have veto power in their functioning of the Security Council. And that has led to many wars across the globe. So in this line, the author argues that if a COVID-19 kind of situation had started from the United States of America, the WHO would have probably towed the lines of United States of America as well as it had towed the line of China in the case of COVID-19. Further, the author highlights that the blame lies on the way the Chinese state operates, and this is because there is difference in the way the US functions and the Chinese state functions, and that is because the United States of America is a democracy and it has a free press. And being a democracy and having a free press, United States of America would not have found it easy to suppress the kind of details China has been suppressing. And we note that under international pressure, China has recently revised the number of casualties in the state of Wuhan. And this shows that China had been deliberately suppressing the information regarding the fatalities because of COVID-19 pandemic. Further, the manner of election of the World Health Organization's head also makes it dependent upon the member states. And it is said that the head of the agency, who is elected after the support of powerful member states, does not enjoy the independence and autonomy that should come with a position of that stature. Further, the WHO does not function independently and it relies on the data which is submitted to it by the member states. And this was particularly the reason why the World Health Organization was very relaxed in the first few weeks of the COVID-19 outbreak. And that was because the World Health Organization relied mainly on the information that was provided to it by the Chinese state. And it also needs to be noted that WHO cannot on its own or independently go and verify the information which is provided by the member states. And in this line, it needs to be highlighted that if the WHO wanted to independently verify the information that was provided by the China, there would have been chances that the Chinese government would have denied visa to the WHO officials. And that is what made WHO dependent upon the information that was provided by the China to it. And that led to the poor response from the World Health Organization towards the handling of COVID-19 outbreak. So in this line, the author has suggested 2 reforms that India should push for at the World Health Organization. First is regarding the strengthening of the autonomy of the World Health Organization and also giving more power to the World Health Organization. And in this line regarding the autonomy of the WHO, it is said that autonomy of WHO is the most important thing. And in this line, it is argued that if the autonomy of the institution and the independence of the heads of these institutions is ensured, that will be a key factor in the independent functioning of such organizations. And secondly, more power should be given to the World Health Organization and it should be allowed to independently go and verify the information that is provided by the member states. And as such, the members of the WHO should not have the authority to deny a visa or travel permission to its officials. And that will make the WHO powerful in independently verifying the information that is provided by the various member state governments. And had the WHO independently verified the information that was provided by the Chinese government, the corona outbreak would have been handled more effectively. So these are some of the issues that have been highlighted by the author regarding the functioning of the WHO, and also these are the 2 suggestions that have been provided which India needs to push at the World Health Organization. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Again, this article on page number 7 is related to the PM CARES Fund, and it reads that the PM CARES Fund is not within the ambit of Right to Information Act and it has been declared by the Prime Minister's office. Now, some of the concerns regarding the functioning of the PM CARES Fund were already discussed in the Daily News Simplified of 10th May 2020. So the only change is that the PMO has clarified that the PM CARES Fund will not fall within the ambit of Right to Information Act, which was unclear at the time of presentation of that video on 10th May 2020. So again, let us revise from that video some of the concerns regarding the functioning of the PM CARES Fund and also the comparison of the PM CARES Fund with that of the PM's National Relief Fund or PMNRF. Now this article on page number 12 draws the attention towards the new fund which has been created known as the PM CARES Fund. And this new fund has been created to tackle the distress situation which has been posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this background, a comparison is often drawn between the PM CARES Fund and the PM's National Relief Fund. So let us look at both these funds comparatively, and also let us look at some of the issues that have been raised or some of the concerns regarding the PM CARES Fund. So some of the factual information related to the PM CARES Fund can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view in the topics economic development. And also the comparison between the PM CARES Fund and the PM's National Relief Fund will be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And some of the concerns that have been raised regarding the PM CARES Fund can be important for us from the mains examination point of view under the topic economic development. So let us look at some of these aspects one by one. So now first let us look at who contributes to this PM CARES Fund. So the initial guideline states that the fund receives voluntary contributions from individuals and organizations, and it does not get any budgetary support. That means that it is not funded by the budget of the central government. Secondly, the donations that are made to this PM CARES Fund are exempted and can be counted against a company's corporate social responsibility obligations. So the contributions to this fund are tax exempted, and these contributions can be counted against a company's corporate social responsibility obligations. Again, it is also exempt from the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act 2010. And this fund accepts the foreign contributions also. Now previously during the Kerala floods, the central government had refused foreign aid to deal with the Kerala flood disaster. So this is a new exception that has been made in the PM CARES Fund. Now regarding the membership of this PM CARES Fund, you should note that it is headed or chaired by the Prime Minister of India. And the PM can nominate 3 eminent persons in relevant fields to board of trustees of this fund. Again, the Ministers of Defence, Home Affairs and Finance are the ex officio trustees of the PM CARES Fund. Now as compared to this PM CARES Fund, the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund was first set up in 1948. And this was originally set up to accept public contributions for the assistance of partition refugees. Now regarding its present role, you should note that it is now used to provide immediate relief to the families of those people who are killed in natural calamities. And also it provides relief to the victims of major accidents, riots, and also provides medical expenses for acid attack victims and others. Now this Prime Minister's National Relief Fund was initially managed by a committee which included the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and also the Congress President and a representative of the Tata Trustees and an industry representative. However, this composition was changed in the year 1985. And in 1985, the entire management of this fund was handed over to the Prime Minister only, and who has the sole discretion for fund dispersal from this PM National Relief Fund. Now presently a joint secretary in the PMO administers the fund on an honorary basis. So what we see is that there is familiarity in the role which is played by both these funds, that is the PM CARES Fund and the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund. Again, both these funds are at the disposal of the Prime Minister of India. And both these funds are aimed at tackling the issues related to natural disasters. However, this PM CARES has been specifically created to tackle the issue of COVID-19 pandemic. So after this, let us look at some of the concerns which have been raised regarding the PM CARES Fund. Now first is that concerns have been raised against companies who are donating to this fund. Now in this line you might be knowing that Reliance Industries has made major contributions to the PM CARES Fund. However, this company has been accused of cutting the salaries of its own employees. Again, the railways have donated rupees 151 crores to this fund. However, they have not been able to provide free transport for destitute migrant workers. So these are some of the concerns that have been raised regarding the funding of PM CARES Fund. Again, The center has not responded to the queries on how much money is there in the PM CARES Fund and how and when it will be used for providing the relief to the affected parties due to this COVID-19 pandemic. Further, it is not clear whether this fund comes under the Right to Information Act or is it under the oversight of Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So this is again another serious concern regarding the functioning of the PM CARES Fund. Further, the PM CARES web page is opaque regarding the amount of money collected, names of donors, and the expenditure from the fund so far. And in contrast to this, the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund provides the annual donation and expenditure information. However, even this fund does not provide a detailed breakup of the contributors, etc. Further, the PM CARES Fund's trust deed is not available for public scrutiny. Further, the decision to allow uncapped corporate donations to the fund, which can be acted or counted as the CSR expenditure, have been opposed by various activists. And such a facility of considering the contributions to this fund as CSR expenditure is not available for funding to the PM-NRF or the CM's Relief Fund. And this goes against a previous guideline which states that the CSR should not be used for funding the government schemes. So this move of considering the funding to the PM CARES Fund as CSR donations goes against the Government of India's own guidelines only. So some of the issues regarding the functioning of the PM CARES Fund is that it is opaque and non-transparent. Again, there are issues related to the accountability of this PM CARES Fund. Now in this background, the Government of India has said that they will provide the details of the members who are funding to this PM CARES Fund and also the expenditure from this fund in due course of time. So these are few important issues related to the PM CARES Fund, and these can be important for us from the exam point of view. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now with this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.